Imagine with me for a moment, if you will, to a time in which Christianity was illegal. Let's say that even today, it's illegal to practice our faith and to be Christians. We can't worship out in the open. We can't let people know that we're worshiping. We're having to do it in hiding and in secret, in quiet. And tragically, you are caught. A police officer storms in, he takes you, he puts you in cuffs, he's taking you down to the station. You're going to be imprisoned because you're a Christian. And you begin having a conversation with this officer where you say, is it really so wrong for me to be a Christian? For me to have faith in God? Sir, do you not believe in God? And you could tell that the question kind of is weighing on this officer. And he's thinking about it. You can tell he's wrestled with it before. And he says, it's not for me to decide whether God is real or not. I just know that it's my job to bring Christians in. But he said, tell me though, why is it that you do believe in God? Why are you a Christian? If that was you sitting in the back of that seat, talking with this officer, and he's asking for the reasons in which you believe in God, what would your answer be? Would you be able to give an account? Would you be able to defend your faith before Him? In Scripture, this is what we're commanded to have as Christians. We're commanded to have a defense. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15 says that Christians are to be ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you. Could you give that defense? Could you give an account for this hope? Sadly, far too many Christians, in the broad sense of the word, are not able to give this defense. And we know that they're not able to give this defense based upon the fact that they're leaving Christianity. There was a study done from 2007 to 2014 where they were looking at the number of Christians within denominations, again, looking at the broad sense of the word. And what they found is that 7.8% were leaving Christianity, whereas 6.7% were going towards atheism and agnosticism, or at least an unaffiliated faith. Today, there are roughly 326 million people in the United States. And so what this would mean is that within that period from 2007 to 2014, that there have been roughly 25.4 million people that have left Christianity, whereas 21.8 million have gone towards atheism, agnosticism, or an unaffiliated faith. Perhaps the reason for this, or at least part of the reason of this, is that people don't know how to defend their faith. Maybe they're not able to answer some of these difficult questions about why they have faith, why they believe in God, and to examine the evidence. Psalm 19, verses 1 and 2 says the following: "The heavens are telling the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of His hands. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge." David was acknowledging the fact that when a person will look around at the creation, whether it's night or day, that it is pouring forth knowledge about God, about the awesome being in which we serve. Today, while there's all kinds of different angles in which we could take a look at the evidence in which supports God, one of my absolute favorites is to take a look at God's creatures, to take a look at the animals that surround us, and look at the ones that blow my mind, that scream of a creator, that give solid evidence, logical evidence, that The person that we serve is real. Thank you for joining us for this lesson as we examine God's creatures that blow my mind. Have you ever wondered how it is that the woodpecker is even still alive? Why isn't it extinct? For all intents and purposes, any animal that smashes its head against a tree all day long should not have a very long lifespan. And yet for the woodpecker, no big deal. But when we really examine just how much force and how much strain is happening on the woodpecker, it tells us that it has to have been designed. This is not something that could have evolved over time. Let's take a look at some of the details of this animal. Let's start by talking about G-force for just a moment. What is G-force? G-force is simply the force that gravity puts on us. And so just by standing here or sitting there at home, you're experiencing 1 G. And so the reason, let's say a person weighs 150 pounds, the reason that they weigh 150 pounds is because of gravity's pull. So if we were to go to the moon, a person that weighs 150 pounds here on Earth would weigh less at the moon because the force of gravity, the pull of gravity is less. Well, but that can also be increased depending on what we're doing. So, for example, when you go to a theme park and you get on that roller coaster and you climb to the top and you begin screaming down that decline, you come to the bottom, what you will experience there, you'll feel yourself really get pushed down into your seat. Some of the best roller coasters are at that moment placing between 3 and 4 Gs on you. And what that means is that if you weigh 150 pounds, now you can multiply that by 3 or 4. And that is how much your body is feeling, how much weight and pull your body is feeling as a result of that. Which is why it feels funny to try to raise your arms. They're just so heavy. And same thing, if you come screaming to the top of a hill, you can feel that light feeling. Maybe if you're on one of those rides that you do a really big drop. The reason you have that funny feeling in your stomach is because for just a moment, your body drops, but everything inside rises. It's a weird play on G-force in your body for just a moment there. And then when you reach the bottom, you feel all of that pull as you come to a stop. We experience G-force regularly, whether we're driving in the car or anything like that, not a big deal. But G-force can also be very dangerous. As a matter of fact, fighter pilots can endure between 8 and 9 Gs when they're doing some of their extreme maneuvers in the air. They have to have specialized suits and go through some pretty rigorous training just to be able to fly up in the air. They have to learn how to control their body, to keep blood flowing in their brain so that they don't pass out. There are videos all over the internet of people that are riding in fighter jets that are passing out because they don't know how to handle the G-forces that are occurring in that flight. 10 Gs has the ability to kill us if we endure it for too long. If we were to be flying in a plane and we were experiencing 10 Gs for a solid minute, it would pull the blood out of our brain, deprive our brain of oxygen, and it could kill us. So G-force can be very deadly, especially depending on how long we have to endure it. Now, that's just 10 Gs. There have been people throughout history that have actually experienced more Gs than that. So for example, back in 1945, Air Force officer and biophysicist John Stapp went through some testing about G-force and how much the human body could handle. He endured an astounding 46.2 Gs when he was going in a rocket sled from 632 miles an hour to a dead stop in just 1.4 seconds. That put a tremendous strain on his body. He suffered injury, including permanent eye damage, as a result of that test. But there have been some people that have endured even more than that. Back in the 2000s, they began putting in accelerometers into Indy cars just to see what was happening within these Indy cars, how fast they were accelerating, decelerating, everything that was occurring, including crashes. Well, they have the ability to measure G-forces. In 2003, Indy race car driver Kenny Brack was involved in a horrific accident in which the car that was in front of him, they kind of collided. It lifted his car up, sent him over into one of the guardrails, and basically exploded his car, sent him spinning. And in that crash, he suffered an extreme G spike of 214 Gs. To date, that is the most G-force that any human has endured and survived. It also put Kenny Brack in the hospital for about 18 months. He suffered incredible injuries from a broken sternum, fractured ribs, multiple breaks in his femurs, a shattered vertebrae. He severely crushed his ankles. It nearly cost him his life, but he was able to make it back. 214 Gs, even if just for an instant, can have devastating results on the human body. So what does this have to do with the woodpecker? Back in 2015, at the Journal of Physics, the conference series, there is an article about how do woodpeckers avoid brain injury. What they discovered in doing a very comprehensive analysis of the G-force that is being sustained when a woodpecker is smashing its head against a tree was astounding. They found that a woodpecker at times can endure 1,500 Gs from a single peck. That's 1,500 Gs from a single peck. Again, 10 Gs has the ability to kill the human body. For a woodpecker, it's withstanding up to 1,500 Gs. But it's not just sustaining 1,500 Gs. The woodpecker is able to do this up to 20 times per second and up to 12,000 times per day without injury, without any damage at all. How in the world is a creature like the woodpecker able to subject itself to so much stress, to so many Gs, not to mention straight on the brain and the head, and yet survive? This thing shouldn't be alive, but it is. Why? Because of how well God designed the woodpecker. From top to bottom, the woodpecker is just simply designed to smash its head against a tree. A lot of birds, if you've ever taken a look at their feet, just to start from the bottom up, a lot of times they'll have 3 toes in the front and they'll have 1 in the back. That's not true for the woodpecker. They actually have 2 in the front and 2 in the back. Why? To provide greater grip. What they're looking for is stability, to hold on to a tree. That way they can thrust their head into a tree with greater force. Their feet, even as they are designed, so that they can slam their head against a tree. They also have extra stiff tail feathers. They have tail feathers that they will use as a tripod effect. So not only will they have their feet on the tree, but they'll place their tail as an additional stabilization point against the tree, and they're extra stiff. So again, it just provides them a more stable base in which they can slam their head against a tree with supreme force. Even if you look at the way that they molt, the way that they lose their feathers, they will only lose certain feathers at certain times. They will not molt all of their tail feathers, particularly the rigid ones, at the same time. A lot of times what they will do is they will molt the outside ones, which are less stiff, and then once those grow back, they'll molt some of the ones in the middle, which are more stiff, so that they can maintain great stability and never lose that. When we make our way up to the head and we start looking at all of the components that surround its head is incredibly well designed as well. If we start at the beak itself is one that is able to handle the impact of slamming itself against the tree. It's super strong, it's self-healing, It keeps itself from being dulled. It can actually kind of self-sharpen, or it'll heal itself to be the proper shape, so that it is able to, again, withstand all of these G's without any type of problem. It's perfect for chiseling and drilling holes into trees. Now, the structure of the beak all by itself is actually made up of microscopic rods. In other words, it is made for it to be able to carry the G-force through the beak and then to begin to get to the head, in which we'll talk about where the G-force goes from there. So all of these rod-like structures that the beak is made up of is simply made to carry the force of the peck around. Well, as it slams its head against a tree, and that force begins at that central point on the beak, it begins coming back towards the head, we have a problem. Because if 1,500 G's make its way to the brain, well, we got brain soup. This thing is dead. But somehow it's able to survive. Well, first of all, when we take a look at how the beak is connected, first of all, the top part of the beak is connected in such a way that's going to carry the force to the cranium, whereas the lower beak will actually start carrying it down away from its head. Just behind the beak, it starts with a cartilage structure. That's going to be one of the first cushion points. So not only do the rods take this force, but when it reaches the cartilage, that begins starting to soften some of the blow as well. Not nearly enough as it is. When we finally make our way to the cranium, we find that it too is perfectly designed to handle G-force. Matter of fact, it's been called one of the world's most complex helmets. The cranium is made up of a material that's both almost plate-like but spongy. Plate-like in a sense that it's able to shield and deflect, but also it absorbs some of that. When we start getting down to the microscopic level, we also see it being more rod-like as well. That's basically carrying the force around the brain. The whole point of the woodpecker's design is to try to minimize the amount of force that's coming into the brain. So, the way that this works is basically like this. The woodpecker pecks. The force is transferred through the beak. Some of it's diminished there. It hits that cartilage at the back of the beak. Some of the force goes away there. When it hits the cranium is again designed to carry the force around the cranium to where it handles it without breaking, carries the force around the brain, down the spine, down to the feet and tail. Therefore, the woodpecker was able to withstand the peck. It's perfectly designed with this complex helmet just to keep the force from transferring into the brain. When we look at the woodpecker's brain, it too is situated perfectly in order to handle G-force. So first of all, there's not a lot of wiggle room inside of the cranium. If you have ever heard the phrase, it's not the fall that kills you, it's the stop. So if a person falls, the problem isn't in the fall, the problem is when you hit the ground. Well, that's why NFL players receive concussions, because they're running as hard as they can, they hit each other and they stop, but the brain inside keeps going, smashes into the inside of the cranium, causes damage, bleeding. It's called a concussion. And that, of course, is damage to the brain. Well, inside the woodpecker's cranium, their brain doesn't have as much wiggle room. Therefore, if it's not wiggling around as much, when it slams its head against the tree and gets that sudden stop, there's less movement. Even when we take a look at the way that the woodpecker's brain is situated, the way that it's positioned inside of the cranium, it's very unique. When you think about our brain, for example, our brain is more horizontally situated inside of our cranium. What I mean is, if we were to hit something head on, we know that there is a smaller portion of our brain, it's a more focused point at the front. Well, if our brain is like this, is horizontal, the woodpecker's brain is actually situated to be almost vertical. What that means is that when he pecks against the tree, he has more surface area on his brain to again handle whatever impact is coming inside of his brain thus reducing brain damage and allowing him to be able to peck all day, every day, as much as he wants without suffering brain damage. In the same study in which they found that the woodpecker is sustaining up to 1,500 Gs, that Journal of Physics at the conference series, when they started calculating all of the ways that the G-force is being transferred around the body, they found that its body is protecting itself from 99.7% of the G-force. So if it's sustaining 1,500 Gs and 99.7 of that never makes its way into the brain but is carried all throughout the body, what that means is that a massive 1,500 G blow would be the equivalent inside of the brain of being 4.5 Gs. And so the reason it's able to sustain so much G-force is because by the time it gets to the brain, it's about like a roller coaster. There's no getting around it. The woodpecker is perfectly designed to smash its head against a tree, to peck all day long. From its beak to the cartilage, to its cranium, to even the way its brain is situated, to the way that the force is carried away from its body, down its tail, its spine, its legs. It's perfectly designed to handle G-force. So the woodpecker can handle the G-force. But it still has some other problems. If you remember, John Stapp sustained eye damage because of the G-force that he was undergoing. Why doesn't the woodpecker blow out its eyes? Why doesn't it receive eye damage? Well, in a slow motion video, what we can see is that just before the woodpecker pecks, it actually closes its eyes. Now, if you've ever heard a woodpecker and how quickly it's hitting, that's pretty amazing that it's opening and closing their eyes. So it opens its eyes in order to gain its aim, closes its eyes just before it hits the tree. It has perfect aim, drills a hole, but since it's closing its eyes, it's putting on its seat belts, if you will, for its eyes. Not only that, but most birds have an additional clear membrane that goes over its eyes as well. So it kind of has two seat belts. It has the clear one that goes over, but it also has its eyelids itself. Well, not only do these serve as a protection for blowing out its eyes, but as you might imagine, there's a lot of wood flying around, chipping around, and that additional membrane and closing its eyes are going to keep the wood shards from flying in its eyes and also causing it to go blind. Well, and not only that, with all of these shards flying around, what about the protection for its nostrils? I don't know about you, but I don't want any splinters in my nose. The woodpecker doesn't either. And so it actually has some protection over its nostrils, some stiff little feathers that will deflect off those little wood shards that are coming. No problem, no splinters in the nose, feeling good. Okay, so awesome. The woodpecker has now made a hole. Okay, now what? Okay, so you made a hole, you've successfully drilled into a tree, but it turns out that the bug has burrowed up a little bit. How are you going to get it? Do you just go back and continue to drill and drill and drill? There's a lot of effort, a lot of calories that are burned for not much. Well, it has the perfect design for that as well. The woodpecker's tongue is also very specialized. Some woodpeckers' tongues can reach up to 6 inches, which is very handy if you drill into a tree and you can go up and you can get the bug. Well, first of all, where does it put a 6-inch tongue? That could be a bit of a problem. But this tongue goes around the head. Now, how is it? Why in the world would it have a tongue wrapped around its head? Well, a couple of reasons. Storage. If you need a 6-inch long tongue, you have to put it somewhere. So it has the ability to have a chamber to keep it. But scientists have also come to realize that since its tongue is wrapping around its head and it actually splits into 2 sides, that it functions perhaps as just one more safety feature to keep the G-force away from the brain. Well, the problem is how are you going to get the bug? Because it's just a tongue, right? Well, a woodpecker's tongue at the tip is actually spear-like. And so not only is it hard, does it have the ability to kind of puncture the bug, but it also has some barbs that are in the reverse direction. So when it spears the bug, it actually hooks it, kind of like a fishing hook, in which it's able to hit the bug, to spear the bug, to grab the bug, and to be able to pull it out. Not only that, but they have kind of a sticky substance on their tongue. So it's giving itself the greatest opportunity as it possibly can to get this bug. Well, when you finally bring it into your mouth, that's a problem too, right? Because you have a glue-like substance and barbs and everything like that. Why doesn't it swallow its own tongue? As you might imagine, as soon as it enters into the mouth, God has designed for its saliva to break down the sticky substance, release the bug, swallows the bug, no problem, he gets his dinner. When I think about the woodpecker, to me this screams of a designer. This proclaims that we have a God. When we look at all of the specialized features, how well designed it is, it boggles my mind to even try to think about how something like this could happen slowly over time. How does a bird slowly develop a tongue that wraps around its head? How does an animal develop a brain that turns 90 degrees to better handle the G-force? How does it develop slowly over time all of the components in its beak and the cartilage, its feet, its tail, its cranium? These are processes that must be full and complete at the time that they are designed and the time that they're created. And it doesn't make sense for it to be something that slowly happens over time. When I look at this evidence, what I see is that this proclaims a God that designed the woodpecker, a God that is giving us evidence that He exists. When we take a look at Psalm chapter 50, God claims ownership of all animals. He says, "I know every bird of the mountains. Everything that moves in the fields is mine." The woodpecker is one of those amazing creatures that blows my mind, that tells me that we have a God worth serving, worth worshiping. And I can't wait to take a look at more of His animals and more of the evidence that He has surrounded us with.